All right, let's awkwardly go over how to do the passive in English. So if we start with the verb to poke, the past participle of that is poked. And notice that this is actually not just past, but it's also passive. This is the equivalent of what we would call the fourth principal part in Latin, the perfect passive participle. More on that later. But to make a passive in English, you need a form of to be along with this past participle. So if I want to say in the simplest way possible, poking in the passive, I could say, I am poked. So that would be your present simple. Let's imagine that someone is being particularly insistent. You could say, if it's an ongoing action, and this would be present progressive, I am being poked. And so the difference here is that you have your form of to be, your am in both of these. You have your perfect participle here, your past participle in English. But to express this as a continuous action, you use being along with that. This is what you'll recognize as your present active participle of the verb to be in English. So you combine two forms of to be here to make this. English is kind of awkward. In Latin, when we get to that, we will do this with just a couple endings. Now, let's say someone is about to be rather rude. I can say, I will be poked. So now you're just adding another little helping verb in here, will, to make this future. This is future simple. And in English, we don't really distinguish between these things too much, but I could imagine this going on for a long time as well. If I know what I'm in for, I will be being poked. And that sounds kind of awkward. We don't do this too much in English, and we tend to just use the simple future for both of these. In Latin, this distinction is going to be a little bit more important. Then, if we want to go to the past, we could say, and this is the perfect tense, which we would just call a simple past in English, I was poked. Like I was poked once, it was not very pleasant, and then I proceeded to visit my horrifying revenge upon the poker. But if this also lasted a long time, I could say, I was being poked. I was being poked for like 10 minutes before I finally pushed the cat off and said, go. But let's imagine that we want to get more sophisticated here. We want to have completed actions, not just simple or progressive. This is the thing that sounds like it's past, but is technically a sort of present state of being. You could say, for your true perfect, which is the other way you can translate your perfect tense in Latin, I have been poked. Like, I have been poked once. Wasn't very pleasant, and I decided never to do it again. Or have it done to me, rather. In the future, I can say, by the time you will listen to this, I will have been poked by my cat. So I will have been. So here you're using this little further helping verb, have, to indicate that this is a completed action. Notice how in English, we just pile these things on top of each other. We have tons of little helping verbs that are all just little simple forms of our most basic verbs in English, and we stick a whole ton of them together to make distinctions between when things have happened. But what if I want to put this further back in the past? I can just take this verb, have, and just like you did with your perfect and pluperfect active, you shove that back into the past and you get your pluperfect. So you could say, I had been poked. And if you look at these are all the helping verbs that you use in English to make all your different passives. And a little bit will change depending on the person. So you could say, you are being poked. And so you need to change am to are. You could say he, she, or it is. But aside from that little variation in these verbs from am to are to is, we are, you could say something like, we have been poked, or we had been poked. You still have the same elements, you just have to make sure they all match the right person. And if you try to make these in English, it'll sound weird, and you don't need to worry about some exact formula. Try saying it in English. If it sounds right, you've probably got the right form of this, because we do this pretty well without even thinking about it. And luckily, in Latin, we don't actually have to think about it to this degree of complexity. We just need to slap a few endings onto things, as you'll see in